Thanks, Sumner, for kicking us off. We're going to do some quick introductions of the redress movement and then turn things over to Kevin. So for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Kashana Hill. I'm the executive director at the Redress Movement, joining you all from New Orleans, Louisiana. Thanks to everyone for being here and welcome. We're really excited to get right into today's conversation. The Redress Movement, for those of you who may be new to joining us, is a relatively young national nonprofit that was set up to work in partnership with communities across the United States to take action to redress residential segregation. We work to repair the harm caused by intentional policies that segregated and continue to segregate communities today. If you haven't taken a moment to review the Redress Movement's website, we certainly invite you to do that at redressmovement.org. Please also take a moment to sign up for our email list if you're not already on it. Thank you again for being here with us today, and we're excited for the conversation we're going to have. I am now going to introduce my colleague who will moderate today's conversation. And with that, I'd like to introduce you all to Kevin Patterson, Redress's senior campaign organizer in Denver.
Awesome. Thanks everyone so much for joining us. I'm glad to see so many folks here on the call. So I'm Kevin, the senior campaign organizer, like everyone just said. I'm just going to have the folks on the panel introduce themselves, say a little bit about the work that they're involved in and some things that they're up to. And then we'll kind of circle back and I'll get to a couple of comments and then we're going to join each other in kind of like a discussion. And we'll also have some questions for the chat as well, so y'all will be able to participate as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Clarice.
Hi, my name is Clarice Dombeck, and I'm the senior campaign organizer for the Redress Movement here in Omaha, Nebraska. I've been with the organization for about 8 months now. And today I invited one of our roundtable members and community partners, Courtney Nunez, to join in this discussion. Courtney, if you'd like to, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Clarice, for inviting me as well. My name is Courtney Nunez. I am a housing stability specialist here in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm contracted through a nonprofit organization called Together. Pretty much what I do in my position is we use emergency rental assistance funding to help folks who are experiencing eviction, past due rent or utilities that are in disconnect or that are shut off. But I also assist with really any sort of housing problem, just trying to get folks to some sort of housing stability. So that's what I do. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Courtney. I'm going to go ahead and just pass it over to John.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us, Courtney. My name is John Marcantoni. I'm a campaign organizer in Denver. Been working with Kevin since last August, and been working on some campaigns in Aurora, Lakewood, and in the city of Denver. I'm very happy to have joining me here Benjamin Lopez, one of my roundtable members, and I'll pass it along to him to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Benjamin. I've been involved with Redress for a couple months now. I think I randomly just went to some community event that was being held and, learned more about the organization. And ever since then, I've kind of been working with John on these campaigns, specifically in Aurora, and then also just, kind of being involved any way I can. Um, I grew up here in Denver, Colorado, so being a part of this movement obviously means a lot to me. And I've been involved in other volunteering activities, maybe not specifically regarding residential issues, but meal deliveries, Meals on Wheels, and then just being an activist in the community is where I'm involved.
Awesome. Thanks everyone so much. So we're here predominantly today because we've all been experiencing like a crisis in the country. And I know a lot of us have been hearing too, organizers as well, but also in community and from community about like what do we do about the situation that we're in with this crisis and all these demands coming at us consistently and like we know like it's a tactic to like create as many problems and start as many fires everywhere. So we want to discuss in this group and have folks in the chat also participate, talking about like what do we do to address like all these issues that seem to be hitting us all at once. And I want to just kind of outline, I think, three big points that I think are important in this time. And I'd love like everyone's contribution around this, but there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. So the three things that I want to reflect on are one, I think we should acknowledge where we are in our political context and speak truth to power. And what I mean by that is we have to be real about like what got us into the situation, what's been going on about that, and have like real political context and analysis about how that's been perpetuated, within society as a whole. So we know for a long time, we've heard about different organizations or policies that would are leading to what we're seeing right now with the current administration, right? So one is like exposing the threat of white supremacy and fascism in the U.S., right, and the harm that that actually has on white folks as well, right? And I think we're starting to see that contemporarily with this administration. Folks who thought that they might be safe or like that it wasn't a problem for them are seeing the impacts of what's happening currently. Um, Two, and we'll come back to some of these topics as well. Two, we need to get serious about our strategy. And what does it mean for us to have a victory? That doesn't always mean we might win a policy. That doesn't always mean that we might win a campaign. If like if your goal is to actually get a narrative to change, like sometimes you might have to have a losing campaign or put up a lot of cost or resources to something to just change people's mind about something, right? But we should be serious about the policies or the victory, the win that we want to have, and what that looks like for people, right? And especially as folks who are participating, as us as organizers, right? We want to be clear about like what is it that we are trying to achieve. And then three, I think we want to be centered on contending to wield power, right? So I think it's not just enough for us to like, okay, say, cool, we won this policy reform. Like, we have to be ready to like shift these systems drastically, right? And what does that take to do that? What do we need to build with each other in order to do that? Like, do we have people in place to make sure that like if we do win that policy that it's going to be implemented and enforced, right? Or if we are making a cultural narrative statement that like it will relate to tangible differences in people's lives. So those were like the three main points that I wanted to hit on. And just starting right back up to the first one, I kind of want to act and reflect with folks like reflecting on where, like, how did we get here? Where do we think we are, and what power do we have? And I'm curious about like what people's thoughts are on the panel, and then I'll also put that in the chat as well. And I'd love to get participants to questions as well. So I'll put that there, and I'll let folks chime in.
Yeah, if I could hop on that question. I think there's a number of factors. I think the post-COVID economy has not been lifting up enough people. We have massive inequalities in our economy and also in our social structure. I mean, I'm not too. I'm 40, and I remember growing up in the 90s and feeling like there was upward mobility, and there really isn't anymore, and it hasn't been for some time. And it's all because we haven't grappled as a country with the effects of, the the economic crash of 2008 and then COVID and these repeated catastrophes in a short period of time that where instead of people coming together, people instead of siloed themselves into their particular groups. And the internet has exacerbated this. And I think that's where you start having people blaming certain groups. And easiest groups to blame are racial minorities, gender and sexual minorities, immigrants. And we've seen all those groups targeted because when there is chaos and uncertainty, scapegoating is the easiest solution. Um, so that's how we got where we are, and I think the power that we have in this moment is our collective action, is bringing people together and pushing back against individualism in order to have a collectivist mindset that if one person is falling down, that hurts everyone. And so we need to help that person falling down. And we have to be changing a narrative, but we can't change that narrative alone. And the more that we can rely on one another, the stronger we'll be.
And if I could speak to that a little bit more so in more local context in Omaha, which is sort of the area that I pay the most attention to. Um, so some folks might know Omaha to be like the blue dot in Nebraska, which is a, primarily conservative state. And one of the things that I've heard a lot on the ground and talking with community members in multiple capacities, so in my role at Redress, as well as some other roles that I serve, is that um, instead of really focusing on protecting the blue dot, that messaging should have really been focused on protecting our community members, our neighbors, our values, and then also just really like protecting democracy rather than really trying to be aligned with a political party that is also, largely funded by corporations and the real estate industry, and developers and all these folks that have done, decades and decades of harm in our communities. And sort of similar to like what John said, like what power do we have now and what can we be doing? We can be changing that narrative from talking about, again, protecting the blue dot to talking about protecting our neighbors and protecting our rights to safe, healthy and dignified housing, and those sort of things instead of aligning with one political party or another.
Definitely. Any thoughts from Courtney or Benjamin? Want to chime in here?
Yeah, definitely. Seeing how we got here and what power do we have, being in sort of a younger generation, I think, the power of the internet is our can be our worst enemy, but also a great tool to use in terms of, what can we do and how can we spread, the good word to, get people involved and, educate people and awaken people to the situation we're at. But I also see the negative sides of that have already happened in terms of, people kind of, talking about the issues that have been addressed already and how they got so big is because people kind of fall into these traps. And obviously, these people who were elected to kind of represent us kind of force their own will upon us. And I think that's been a big issue and enforcing obviously individualism and this concept of the American dream. And obviously, being young, I, never really had that vision of an American dream, talking to older people, the older generation, like John mentioned, how he grew up in the 90s, I never had that vision. And so I don't know, I just think now, how can we use the internet to, get people together in a sense, get back to our roots, because I think that's something that has been lost. and also just educate people to kind of get away from, how, this internet has shaped us and get back to organizing and kind of fighting back, these issues that are going on right now.
Yeah, Courtney, I saw that you were going to chime in there as well.
Yeah, I think I really just wanted to uplift what John said about after COVID, just the increase in individualism. I feel like everybody has felt like um, they've had to do it alone, or that we have all gone through things in solitude. So I just feel like the collective thought about what community is has been lost. I also think that social media, especially for my generation, for our generation, has really just disconnected and distracted a lot of folks, which has really caused just such a disengagement with what is going on in the world. And even on a local level, I think for me, when I think about what can we do, for me, it's going back to the basics. It's about really building that community intentionally. It's about getting to know my neighbors in my neighborhood, and really just starting from there. I try to make things very when I set these goals, just really small and attainable. And how can I do these daily actions that will build that community? Because I do feel like it is a muscle that we're all going to have to reacclimate to.
Yeah, most definitely. You're like already at the collective action change part, which, organized is not surprising. Um, Yeah, but I think definitely. I think like when I was reflecting on a lot of this, right? Like I think I keep hearing the sentiment of like, well, how like I can't believe that we're here now, or like I can't believe that we've gotten to this point, right? And I think if we're like critical, if we're serious about this, if we're paying attention, the writing's been on the wall for a minute, right? Like for decades now, right? We've been seeing more privatization being talked about. Like it's been an ongoing debate about cutting Medicare. We've had really strong right to work fights in a lot of different states, right? We've seen abortion bans come up over and over again. We've seen voter suppression be a tactic and happening across the United States as well, right? And so, like to now see an administration that is just pushing that forward is just a culmination of these things that have been working for under like over and over again, but like in full force. And so I think we also need to be clear about like how we want to frame and shape that too. And it's from both sides of the aisle, right? Like both sides contribute to that narrative. Like even on the progressive side of the aisle, right? When we're talking about immigration, we didn't get a lot of favors from the last election cycle about like, no, that's wrong. Like these are people in our community. This is the fabric of our community. And actually, like people benefit from the way the immigration system is structured right now, right? So I think we also need to work on reshaping our common sense. And we like to Courtney's point, right? We have now an opportunity in this crisis to look at that critically and reshape how people are thinking about what we're going to do to address that, right? And I think we need to be bold about that. I think we need to like seriously be critical and look at like what are we even consuming um that's giving us the kind of the point of views that we had before. So this is a small shameless plug for our book club that's going to be this upcoming Thursday. It's an opportunity for us to like get together with each other and talk about like issues again that have been around for quite some time, but like how's that playing a part right now today in what we're doing. um and then just kind of moving us forward too, right? In the conversation, like around our strategy and getting clear on that, like how do we define a win? And then like I think Courtney, you were kind of right on this already. What are we doing to make that actually happen in reality? Like what's our standard for victory? how you define that with folks. How do you involve community? And I'll post this for the group as well. Like, are the organizations that you're participating in doing that too? For anyone? Like, what's a win? What are concrete demands? What are you looking for that helps you decide what a victory looks like?
I can speak on this one a little bit. And this is just like in my professional position, this is something that I've had to redefine. Clarice and I also had a good conversation about this last week about just redefining what a win is for you. So an example I can actually give is Clarice had referred a tenant to me who was living in very, very poor conditions, multiple code violations, and she had a voucher who was no longer going to pay because of these numerous code violations. So she was needing to move. In my mind, this was going to be a very quick, let's put in an application, let's get you approved, and let's get you moved. This ended up being, I want to say maybe like a month process. And I had to meet with her multiple times and kind of build that relationship and also just learn how she wanted this new phase of her life to look. And just kind of building that new autonomy, I think, too, just like a new opportunity, um, just a new opportunity to live the way that she should have been living for some years now. And just last week, we got word that she's approved. We have her application in, and she should be moved by April. So I think for me, just during that process, I was kind of, I don't want to say getting frustrated, but maybe more impatient, kind of looking for that instant gratification that I think a lot of us have just societally became addicted to. And just having to learn that things require intention and that I want to focus on the goal, not so much on that immediate instant gratification. And so I wrote down a couple of things for me of like what I want to define a win as. So just a few things I have is a win can be a new connection with a person or an organization. It could be access to new information. It could be a new level of understanding on a subject that maybe you didn't know prior. It could be just completing a simple task or conversation with somebody that moves you a little bit further down the line. And a win is also just showing up when you have that capacity. I think, and you had touched on it a bit before, Kevin, just like with everything that's going on, it is constant chaos and it's designed to overwhelm us and to have us disengage and end up, doom scrolling. So just defining what a new win is like, and I said this to Clarice last week as well, like, maybe a win right now in this administration is not policy, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still work to do. So just reminding ourselves of that and just being really intentional so that way we can also avoid our own burnout is really important. It's definitely tough because I do feel like we just want things to go back to normal, but also realizing that we can't do that. And how will we move forward with that new intention and information that we have? So
Yeah, thanks. That's a lot of great stuff. I saw John, you were wanting to chime in as well.
I mean, I actually, what I was about to say, Courtney hit on about the wins being the win sometimes is just getting up in the morning and contacting someone, making a phone call, anything. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed. We got to have grace with ourselves. I think that's the thing that I would add to what she so eloquently said is, you know, our our capacity to take on so much weight. It can oftentimes it can feel like if we're not suffering, then we're not working. And work should not feel that way. This work especially should not feel that way. That even when we're tired, even when we do feel a little overwhelmed, that desire to give back to the community and to do this work, the passion for it, should still be there. And if it's ever not feeling like it is, if it is feeling like drudgery, um, that's where we need to come in and support each other. And, I'm very fortunate to have Kevin, who I can reach out to and knows all the things going on in Denver as well. But, we also really try as a team, the national team, to be there for each other, check in with each other. And I think that's something, of course, we want to do for the tenants that we work with, our roundtable members, everyone, like checking in with each other regularly. Like that's also a big win, because if we're not feeding each other's souls, then we can't expect each other to show up the way we need to.
Yeah, and I think you're both hitting on a point too that I think is really important in building the goals too, and that can be like I think like having a clear focus and purpose too can help you prevent yourself too from signing up for things that you know are not aligned with what you're trying to do too. And I know that can be hard, especially for us who care about like a large swath of things, right? It can be hard to say no to a lot of things, but if it's not within like your goals or what you're trying to move forward to, that's a good indicator too of like where's my stopping point, right? I say I think oftentimes to membership, right, too, like be clear about whether or not it's in your capacity to say yes or no, because like one, I don't want to burn you out, and then two, like if you do say yes, I'm depending on you to do work that now is not going to get done. So it's better just to say no, and we can re-engage later than yes, and then like not be able to have that ball fumble, and then like there's more work that goes into like fixing that later. I think too I think this was gotten at a little bit as well. Like I like smart goals too. So I think one thing that we're seeing and I think that we can refine is like I think it's great. People should always get out in the street. People should always go out and protest. People should show up and put their be like in present to say they stand up against something. But oftentimes we don't see a direct goal connected with that, or what's the next step to make sure that this is achieved after this protest happens, right? And I think that's also I think something that's been highly frustrating when we have like these really big reactions to things. And I'm guilty of that. I've been at to so many marches that like were not built to like specifically solve that problem, but I think it's great to have that righteous indignation around it, right? We want to build off of that, but I think it's also important to like, are you actually linking up with your communities to find the small ways which you can to be a part of actively shifting what that looks like too when we're talking about goals. So again, like particularly when we're talking about like I think I'll just reiterate. I think it's really important to have like goals where you're like, we're building relationships and we're building leadership within our community, and that might not necessarily translate into a specific policy, but like that will help us, whether make a better terrain for tomorrow too. And I think that's and cause for celebration. I think that is something that we want to make sure that is instilled. But I think it's also important to have like specific like smart goals like that are strategic, that you can measure, that are actionable, that are relative, specifically as you're working to contend with power and in an organization with people, right? Like because if you're just showing up to the meeting and every time it's the same people and you haven't made progress in a few years, right? Like that also I feel like can burn people out. I'm just seeing this. Are there questions from the chat or other folks want to chime in on that before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight what you said, Kevin, regarding having like specific goals instead of just being like, super broad and being outside, protesting. Um, wanted to highlight recently that there was like, for example, here in Colorado, here in Denver, there was a Senate bill that wanted to get passed, regarding, immigration and kind of making it easier for law enforcement to work with ICE. But, you know, uh, this other organization I work with, we got together and kind of, we all collectively got together and, showed up to the Capitol and were specific in that goal in getting this bill shut down, and it did. So that's like a victory in itself. Obviously, it's not like the big picture, but that small win of not having that bill passed and, doing better for our community, I think, stuff like that is important. And then kind of highlighting, getting new connections, getting people involved. I think it's important to get people from like all sorts of backgrounds kind of involved in this space. I think, a lot of people obviously, who are involved kind of do this on a day-to-day basis, whether it's through their work and through their activism. But I think there's a lot of people like myself in the middle who, my job isn't, directly related to, this movement, but I still think, we can bring a good perspective and yeah, I can bring people along with me who are in that middle of like, not really, too involved and not really too aware, but they can still bring their own perspectives and bring, fresh minds to the table. Even though they're not directly impacted by stuff like this, I think that's really important because obviously the more people we have, the better. And obviously it kind of goes back to, having community and straying away from that individualism that a lot of us are currently in.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point of like marrying those two things. I love seeing like a protest that leads to like something directly like that's directly challenging a policy that's in place because I think that is explicitly contending to willpower, right? Like, and so like when you see that type of public pressure lead to something too, I think you're right. Like that's a victory, that's a win, and you want to celebrate that and highlight that. And two, right? Like, sometimes a metaphor that I think about is like sometimes it's like playing a game of tug of war, right? And we're trying to just get more people on our side or even on the other side to let go and like not to disengage as well, right? Because that's going to help pull things more towards our way versus, you know, where we're sliding back before. So yeah, definitely. The more folks that we can engage, the more folks we have, even just changing their mind and not participating in the same way can be a good way. And like, a tool out there is like the spectrum of allies, right? To kind of look at that, to feel like maybe your goal is just to get people who are like passively in dissupport to passively be in support, right? So we're just shifting like we're not talking about the super zealots or extremists, right? We're talking about just people in the middle, everyday average folks. Like, if they're coming off a position where it's detrimental, we can move them to somewhere that's neutral, and that's progress too. I just wanted to double check again to see if anyone else wanted to say anything on this. Cool. I mean, Ben, you were kind of already getting into the big thing too about like contending to willpower. And for us, that definitely means like building a bigger we, right? And broadening our coalition. And like if you're gen generally speaking, if you're on this call, you're probably in the choir already, right? Um, and we want to move beyond that, right? We want to reach out to your friends who are not participating in this. We want to bring folks in. And the reason we want to build these relationships and do that way is because like it's going to take that many people, like millions and millions of people, to shift how we perceive that, right? To shift like what the what the current common sense is, right? To shift like the dominant narrative or what we commonly hear, right? And it's literally everywhere, right? We're swimming in it consistently. Um, and so um, we want to like move from maybe abandoning the ship like with the isolation to like taking on the helm of power and steering the direction of where those things are. And like I think everyone's been hitting on this the entire time is that means like we want to make sure that we're inviting folks in. So like um I think we have to think critically too about like what does it mean for us to willpower? What does that look like? And then like how are we shaping that? So I'm curious if folks have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess to speak specifically to things that are happening in Omaha and with the Omaha Roundtable, There has been a lot of internal back and forth with the roundtable, and then also with some partners that sit at our roundtable about how we might want to introduce some Omaha specific campaigns. And um, whether or not we, see ourselves working with city council to introduce these different resolutions, or if we want to use the most direct form of democracy that we can, specifically at the city level, which is introducing an ordinance via a ballot initiative. And going back to like what you were saying earlier in the call, both you and Courtney talked about this, is like we need to get used to exercising our civic engagement muscle, and we need to get comfortable in doing that, even if that means that puts us in a uncomfortable situation, or even a situation where we might potentially lose and not win on this campaign. But at least we've again like put ourselves out there, and have really started like showing up together and showing the rest of our community like this is what we could be doing and should be doing when it comes to civic engagement and building power. Even just knowing, like before even I came into this space 8 months ago, I didn't know that there was an option for community members to directly, introduce policy. So even just, sharing this new information and saying, look, this is an opportunity where we could have direct influence. Let's try that. Let's try something different instead.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, like, I think um, uh, rebuilding the tools of our democracy is something that we definitely need to do. And I don't like, I think that established powers are not going to help us in doing that. So I think that is something that we have to take on ourselves, right? And I think like one thing that I think about is like previously doing C4 organizing, right? It was always amazing to me that like people would come and support a particular candidate and then disperse, but were not willing to come and do the same things for their own community collective power, right? And be willing to be like, no, this is the body that we're going to hold together to hold like these politicians accountable, right? And so yeah, I definitely agree. Like I think like we like it's hard because there's not as many third spaces. It's hard because it takes resources to do that. It's hard because there's not as much resources coming into that type of thing. But I think we are responsible in rebuilding and retooling and reshaping our tools for democracy because we've seen that like that's not going to happen otherwise. Yeah, I see some head nodding and any other folks. Go for it, John. Go for it.
Uh, Man, you and Chris both brought up so many good points and questions. I think what I'd like to add to it, to what you were just saying, Kevin, about like, people show up, the kinds of things that people show up for and then what they don't show up for. And, this isn't a new problem. Like I remember being a kid and hearing about, you always hear about national politics, never hear about local politics. And I think that's um, it's an American problem. Like we focus on the big entities, and we focus on the federal government, and it can feel like, well, we can't wield power against them because that's like too big. And what we forget is that the federal government is made up of 50 states, which are made up of hundreds and thousands of municipalities. And actually our local government decisions affect our lives more directly than anything in Washington. And I think when we talk about wielding power, we have to talk to our constituents, to our neighbors, about how the president doesn't fix the potholes in your neighborhood. You know, Congress in Washington isn't getting a stop sign added to your neighborhood that like needs to be at an intersection. There are people, your city councils have public forums. Many people don't even know that they can talk to city council publicly. They don't know that city council is going to be responsive to their emails or to their calls, and that it's that accessible. And in a place like Denver, actually our politicians are incredibly accessible in comparison to some like larger cities. And so it's reminding people that the power is within themselves. You see a problem that's going on, even if it's something as small as just use an example of somebody that I know who lives across the street from a Costco, and people are like bringing um, shopping carts over to the apartment complex and just leaving them there. And it's like, yeah, you could just leave that there, or you could move it out of the way because that's going to block somebody else, or it's going to um, tarnish, where you're living, and like how we treat our own home, how we treat our own neighborhood. It can be something that small, but that is in and of itself power. And if you can do that in your everyday life on a small level, imagine what you can do with a group of people on a larger level. And that is really the power that we're trying to activate in our organizing work. And I think that if you can bring the expectation of power down from this almost inconceivably large sense to something that's actually manageable on a day-to-day level, then that inspires people.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think for similar reasons, right? I kind of have been shifting away from even like the label of an activist, right? And I'm kind of really because it lets other people off the hook, right? And so like I think like for folks watching this, right? It's like what's small things that you can do consistently within your organization that's going to help move towards those first two things, right? Of acknowledging where we are and um, building a better context around that, and then strategically, and then like helping us to willpower. And I think like that can sound intimidating, like you were just saying, right? But like it can be small things like I'm going to share this post that was created by X organization, right? I'm going to invite somebody to the meet and greet that this organization is doing, right? Like small things that just shift our culture around like how we're interacting with each other are desperately needed right now, right? Because I think we've been beating the dead horse with this one, but like we are incentivized to like um isolate and not engage and not participate or don't not answer your door, right? We're mistrust each other. And what we need to do is like bridge those gaps and do that consistently and collectively towards a specific goal, right? And so like, yeah, some of the easiest things you can do is just text somebody right now and be like, hey, have you heard about this organization? I'm joining because I care about these values. Will you join me too, right? Um, and that gives us so much more capacity to take on things, right? And one of the reasons like local organizing is so much easier is because like it it it's your neighbors, it's those people, but you can directly interact with those people who are also in that community too, right? It's a smaller body of people. It's an easier goal to target. And like if you have multiple blocks organized, you can shift like what the decision making process is going to be on a city level, right? So I think that yeah, and honestly, our opposition has been really good at doing that too, right? That's also a part of the analysis of like how we got here too. Like progressives large have like not been doing that to the same extent that like our opposition has, and they do it everywhere. They do it at county fairs, they do it at church, they do it in their third spaces. But then they're like in our a right, like they're talking about very specific, they have very specific groups and specific people with very specific aims that are organizing people online with like the Twitch with like it's literally everywhere, right? And we have some presence, but we're greatly outnumbered in that. And so I think it's like really breaking it down to small things that we can do. Uh, that's going to help push back against that. And I think that's going to help also address all these issues that we're seeing at the same time as well. So if folks want to maybe talk about that, but like to maybe wrap up that question, like I wanted to ask, like, how are focusing on both members' needs, goals, and goals of the community, or that you work with, like, how are you doing that? How are you focusing on both your members' needs and the goals that your organization or community are working with?
I would say for the Omaha Roundtable specifically, the way that we've been focusing on our members' needs is by creating spaces for joy and socialization, and not just always getting together just to work on these issues, but really to get together to create and to continue to build community and continue to build trust, and really being a space where people know like this is a safe space where I can go to get away from all these issues that are happening in the world. But also at the same time, knowing that the reason why all of us are, in the same space together is because at the end of the day, we're all fighting towards these same issues.
Yeah, awesome. Other folks, thoughts on that? I think it's a really challenging question. And I've actually even been in organizing spaces before where it'll be like, oh, that's too much like a direct service. We can't do that, right? But I think it can be as simple as like, we're going to provide food at this meeting that's late at night that we want people to come to, right? We're going to provide childcare or like help build a community like a childcare co-op that I've seen in some other cities that I was organizing in as well. I think it can be as simple as like, we're going to like maybe even ask for a permit to make sure that people's safety is taken into consideration in this demonstration that we want to do. And I know that sometimes ruffles feathers because of how people might want to or not want to interact with the police or the state, right? But like, is that excluding our ability to actually engage other people? So I like it sounds kind of that example sounds kind of like mild, but like I've seen these conversations happen, right? And I think one thing too that I'd be cautious of when we're engaging in work that's trying to engage a broader people with a very, we have a political strategic agenda, right? But like is like being like the righteous candle, the lone person in the wind, with the martyr syndrome, right? Of like I, I care more about the purity of where my politics are than like actually doing something on this policy, right? Or actually doing something within the community. Because again, it doesn't have to be specific policy, but like uh, I always ask is like, is that though building towards your goal, right? Are you including more people? Is that shifting changing what's happening in your community? Um, any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, I'll move to another question. I think we're also curious about like what short-term crises are you and or people in your community facing, and how do you see these crises interacting with community long-term goals? Like, yeah.
This is something that me and Courtney have talked about quite a bit, and I like to use specific examples. So, the specific example I'll point to is City View, which is a low income housing apartment, like high rise complex here in Omaha. One of few places that accept like general assistance and housing vouchers and other forms of emergency vouchers. And sort of the emergent or emergency situation was with habitability issues. And there are a great number of residents there that are living with some high level code violations. And it's like, what when we originally went in, Redress and a couple of other community partners, the idea was that, yeah, we're going to be able to get money from the city of Omaha to either move folks or fix all these issues. And we have to make this happen because there's no way folks should be living in these conditions. But once we were in there, we realized that unfortunately, the place that we're at right now, it's not going to be, it wasn't feasible to do like to create this, huge shift and have this like really big impact. So instead, sort of what ended up happening is really trying our best to connect residents to those direct service providers, right? Like Together Omaha and Family Housing Advisory Services that provides emergency rental assistance and then also has connections to a lot of other service providers. So I'm just trying to ensure that community members that we're working alongside have access to that information and resources that already exist, while at the same time still talking about how these issues around slumlords and source of income discrimination and our rental registry are really connected to our long-term goals of desegregating our communities and ensuring that Black and Brown community members and our most vulnerable community members actually have a choice in where they live, and that with some long-term changes that folks will be able to really have can have agency over shifting those policies and shifting those narratives. Courtney, I'm not sure if you want to speak to that some more as like a direct service provider.
Yeah, so essentially dealing with these crises is majority of my job. Majority of the folks I am seeing are either have like a 7-day notice, a 30-day notice, depending on if it's a private or like property management company. It might be, way past due, like more than 6 months, or just based off a month. And I will say, like, when folks are in crisis, you don't have the capacity, when you don't have stable housing, you don't have the capacity to engage in what's going on locally or in the world. Um, uh, And I will say I feel like it's great that I was able to get connected with Clarice and the redress movement, because I think just even with the dealings of City View, we like Clarice said, we had expectations that the city was going to step in and do what they should have done. And just kind of coming to the realization that we would have to figure it out ourselves. So I think that was great, and that gives us another opportunity to realize that we are all that we got, essentially. And just kind of coming to the realization that, the systems and the things, though they might be in place, they are not meant to operate as I think that we all thought. But just creating power in that, because there is power in, organizations to connect with these service providers. That's where I would honestly say is our biggest opportunity right now, is just connecting with other organizations and resources, and just getting our folks who need those services connected. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely like having those twin things can be super helpful because I think oftentimes as organizers too, we're like, we don't have the resources necessarily to help address like those immediate needs of like, well, my rent's due tomorrow. Like this campaign sounds great, but like I gotta go, right? And so I think yeah, it's really important that we're doing that. And then I think you're right, right? Also, I think that provides us an opportunity too to say like, well, why do we have a system and a structure that's so easily dismantled and so easily the first thing to go are people's basic necessities, right? Like their housing, like the resources that are provided to them, like, right? I think this provides us an opportunity to say, like, we should get really serious about like how we're doing this as a society to make sure that like we never face a situation like this again, right? Um,
I
any
want
other folks? Oh, go for it. Yeah, go for it, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing as you were talking. And I do just feel like it holds the service providers accountable too. Just because I will say, like, um, we might provide a service, but just because an organization provides a service doesn't necessarily mean that they know what's going on, even in their own community that they're serving. So I do feel like, especially, and I'll speak, and this is more so on like an individual level than with the organization I work for. I do feel like there was a lack of knowledge on who this funding could really serve. So it was great that we got connected with Clarice, and that we had direct information on what was going on, so that way we could assist as many folks as possible. Because some of these organizations, unfortunately, they do have this funding, but they don't have the ear to what's going on in their own community. So sometimes the funding might sit there, and like you said, like some people got to pay their rent today. They can't wait, and it's a matter of people just not knowing. So, and because they didn't know, now they end up evicted and homeless. Um, so I think, yes, I think it also just holds the service providers accountable too. So that way, the little funding that we do have is going to our most vulnerable folks. I feel like that is super, super important right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great perspective. I hadn't thought about that before either. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to go ahead and move us to the last panel question that I have, and then I'll get to the Q&As. I see at least one already generated, and I want to get to that. But like, when you reflect on intake and outreach in the ways that you are now or could be, in what ways in what ways are you now or could you be more robust in like that outreach? Like, how could you be onboarding people more robustly? What would make that more meaningful, more powerful?
I think that like you and I have dealt with, that there's a real changing landscape in people answering doors when you knock on them, people answering their phone if it's a number that they don't recognize, just getting people out of their house in general. Uh, we are in an antisocial age, and that makes recruitment not so much more difficult as it just means that we have to readjust in how we recruit. And, we've been working on here in Denver on how to better recruit digitally, how to engage people on social media, engage people with newsletters, targeted ads. Like these are all things that we're building up to. But there's still an enormous amount of effectiveness with, you know, with like the WhatsApp group chats that we have with some buildings, that we've been able to get. We've been able to get tenants to join, and then join their friends. There's something still very communal about that, even though we're not in a shared space. I think though that what's most important with recruiting and outreach is is some of this intentionality that we've already touched on, and which I believe you brought up in your first question, is like we can't just pop up at somebody's door and tell them like, hey, we have this organization and we're doing some cool stuff, come join us. Like people need a reason to prioritize the work that we're doing. And that means that when we show up, when we engage, um, we need to already have in mind like things that people can do. One way is through events, which we've already put on a few in the last few months. Listening tours, speaking tours, um, also actions. It's actually a lot easier to get people to show up to something like a rally than get people to show up to a panel. You know, but the problem with the rally is that oftentimes people show up there and they think that the end point is the rally. Once the rally is done, we're done with this issue. And so it's really important from the organizer side to always know what the next 3 or 4 things that have to be done are, so that people have the feel of, oh, this is a continual commitment. It's not just I'm going to show up for 2 hours on a Saturday somewhere. It's that this is the first Saturday that I'm going to show up somewhere for 2 hours, and then next week we're going to be doing another thing. And it's about building that with intention, those different actions and those different get-togethers, and finding a balance. But it's hard work. It's a little more logistics than I think might have even been there in the past. But I think the answers to that question, they're very clear. It just takes a lot of work and
Awesome.
vision. That's the other thing.
Other thoughts? Also, if you're watching this and in the chat and you're not putting us on blast by saying like we should do this and this, like that would probably be helpful. So like if you're thinking of things that like this would be great as a new person in the redress movement, this would be a great time to put that in the chat. And yeah, same. Yeah. So like if you have thoughts on like what are better ways like organizations like ours or ones that you participate in could be better about like onboarding or getting folks involved too. Um, but other thoughts on the panel from that?
Yeah, for me, I guess I'm really working towards trying to um, create intergenerational bonds and relationships. That way, for example, I'll just say like in Omaha, in North Omaha in particular, it's really been like elders that have been upholding this work for so long. And after a while, they do get burnt out. And then when it's time to, pass the torch, sometimes the ball gets dropped, and some of that, I guess, longstanding community and like institutional knowledge can get lost. So, in organizing events um, and in recruiting people, I've tried my best to be very intentional to make space for young people, especially who haven't, at least in Omaha, haven't historically been involved in many of the movements here. And I feel like the way that I'm trying to at least get better when it comes to, you know, recruitment and retention is by also showing up for the things that they care about, and also really just finding where those intersecting pieces are of those different sort of like movements. So whether it is like Nebraskans for Palestine, or if it is the Women and Gender Study group at UNO that's having an event, just really showing up and trying to again highlight like our shared experience and our shared sort of like identities as um, communities that are living like under white supremacy, and really using that as the reason why we should be doing this organizing work together and upholding each other, and really promoting each other's movements.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of reiterating what we've all said earlier about this, kind of individualistic society that we live in. I think it's very easy for people like myself or anybody who kind of is in like a comfortable situation in life to kind of just zone out everything. And, those people are, I would say relatively hard to kind of outreach to because it's easy for them to kind of just go to work, do what they need to do, shut the door, and not really be bothered by all these issues that we're really trying to you know, tackle. And so I guess how can we outreach to them? What are some ways we can do it? I think, we could all work on, framing what we work on and how it could affect them. Like, for example, maybe they're trying to buy a house. Maybe we can tell them like, hey, like, all these corporations and landlords that are coming in and causing these issues and making rent expensive and making owning a house like nearly impossible, we can use your help as well to kind of, move our movement forward. Or something such as, you don't want to see, you're tired of seeing unhoused people on the streets, well, part of that is the issue as well. You can also be involved in helping that. And, it can make a difference in their lives as well, in plenty of different factors as well, whether it's like urbanism, obviously housing, the rising cost of things right now, things are getting out of hand. So people are affected, and I think we can frame our outreach to those people. I think they can maybe see it in a different way versus, just them, living their day-to-day life and being unbothered and, kind of have this helpless attitude towards it, because, they just think, oh, I can't do anything about it. And that's it, it's the end of the story. I think, if we all get more people involved, I think we can definitely do something about it. But, it's just kind of framing it to a more personal level for all different types of people on the spectrum.
I think that issue too of like how we frame it and talk about it for people is super vital too, because like again I think we said this again, but like I'll just reiterate, like I think we do now have like a really huge opportunity as people are losing jobs and healthcare and stability to be like, well, this is why this work is so important. And like and I think you're right, like engaging in like one-on-one conversations. I know that's part of our model, and just talking about like, well, how does that impact you? How can we make sure like if you have been impacted by that, like this doesn't happen again? I saw a question that feels very related to what we're talking to in the chat. Like we're good at activities to ground ourselves in if we're not ready to take action yet, or to share with others who aren't ready but are unsettled by everything going on. Let me make sure I read that right. We are not good activities to go to ground ourselves if we're not ready to take actions yet, or to share with others who aren't ready but are unsettled by everything going on. So what I'm hearing kind of from that is like, what can we do to help ground people? What can we do to make sure folks are insured. And I also wanted to touch too, but from that question on like, I think it is really important, particularly with like higher risk actions, because I know we talk a lot about direct action, but particularly with higher risk actions, like you want, and this is why I think the goals are so important. You want people to be super crystal clear on like, this is what we anticipate to happen. We don't anticipate any arrest. We're going to have like marshals to make sure that people are safe, right? And I also want to say like, being a part of a direct action isn't the end all be all either, right? I encourage it. I think people should do it. Like I want to discourage folks from that. But like there's other things too, particularly like if you're right now, particularly afraid of your safety or your ability, like you're at risk to be like threatened in these situations. Like I think that's something that you should consider, right? But we're also don't want to like police people's agency either and give you the ability to like step into your power and take on an issue full on. But I think like understanding what the specific risk is, what are some risk mitigation, and like being very clear with your organizer what that is. And I've been a part of actions too that have like, and this is the part where the people who have already signed up to be arrested are going to take action, and everyone else is going to like move aside and make sure that like we're all safe, like leaving together from actions, making sure like you have an accountability team. Like there's all types of things that I think would be too deep for this particular webinar to get into, but I think those are things like you want to make sure that you're very clear on a plan about that with folks. And public action, and some, or I'll say sometimes action doesn't need to be public either. So like your anonymous question, for example, is a good way to just like post it somewhere where someone can see it, and then like have it be a part of the discussion. Or like sometimes even like letters could be things. Yeah, go for it. Other folks on that.
Yeah, one of the things that I would suggest, and this is for people who like watching and listening, would be to like just go to a city council meeting or even go to eviction court or different board meetings that are happening in your community. If it's accessible, even like just going to the state legislature, like just to watch, like you don't necessarily have to say anything. And even particularly even like for like eviction court watch, if someone is there from the public watching, it's likely that the judge that's overseeing that day, they might act a little bit differently, right? Not to say that, you know, it's going to halt evictions if there's folks from the public there, but maybe from what I've seen, maybe the judge might act with a little bit more care and compassion instead of malice and um, irritation. So I think that just showing up in these different spaces, civic spaces that are our spaces, is an important first step.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. And I think that could be really politicizing as well. Like us, like even seeing like a vote happen and how that happens can be like, oh, okay, there's some things that I didn't learn from the basic civics class that happened here. Um, Any other thoughts on that question? Otherwise, I'll get to our first Q&A question that was submitted. Is there a good resource for technical questions from people doing organizing to try to redirect the conversations on these issues? For example, a broad-based coalition that wants to set up an online video campaign. What are good ways to handle permissions from people who would agree to be recorded? With it being a coalition effort rather than an effort by a specific organization. Um, I haven't I haven't seen that happen outside of like an organized coalition context, because I'm thinking of like Soapbox as a resource, which was like I remember a campaign where you could type into like a Soapbox and it would have like your organization's URL linked on the back end, and it would be about that issue, and you could upload that, and like by doing that you were consenting to have it like put in. It was like it had mechanisms to do that. And I've seen other people like even go out to the field and like talk about like I'm supporting this particular issue, and it was just like people on their phones doing that, and then sending it to a social media and like tagging each other in that, or with a hashtag, a couple different hashtags about that particular campaign. And I've seen that be somewhat successful too. That's probably, if you weren't trying to do it like as a branded sort of organization, that's probably the route that I would go. But I think you should have coordination with your particular coalition on like, what's that branding going to look like? How do we make sure we're all on the same kind of message on that? Are we going to use the same hashtags? What platform are we using for that? Who's going to be represented that, and making sure that you have enough, that when you do it, that it actually makes a dent in the algorithm, right? So because if it's like one or two people and it gets lost, then that's also not as effective. So those are the things that I would say based off of that question. I don't know if other folks had thoughts on that particular question. Thank you for that question. I think the next question that we have is like, I'm new in my org and protection and advocacy agency. I am young and new to the work, and I'm experiencing feeling siloed in my position, and notice a lack of communication from others. I want to collaborate with, and I think burnout is a major factor. Can I speak more to bridging the gap? Can you speak more to bridging the gap with those I work with and dealing with these helplessness I'm starting to feel myself? Anyone want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so I really want to speak to that one because, I think that sometimes older organizers or just people who have been in a particular field advocating for certain things for a long period of time, um, it's not just burnout, it's cynicism of being able to like what you can actually achieve. Um, a lot of people, I mean, and this is human nature, we get set in our ways, and the older you'll get, the more you'll just be like, this is what I like, this is what I believe, you can't move me, and that's just what it is. And when especially when you're new to an organization and when you're young, it that cynicism that older people have can feel like it can make you feel like you're dumb or like your opinion doesn't matter, and it can be very discouraging. And I think that um us older folk oftentimes don't realize that's the way we're coming across, and we don't realize that we are shutting down new voices and new ideas. And so but we want to know if we are, and those people who are in leadership positions in your organization, if they're good leaders, they're going to want to get that feedback and they want to help you, you know, like behind that defense that we've had to put up because of years of disappointment, they genuinely want to see the next generation stand up and the next generation take charge. And so that's going to mean that you need to let them know. And I know that can be scary. It can be intimidating. Maybe it will be easier for you to do it via a digital means, like through an email to your supervisor rather than in person at first. But speak up because the right leaders, they're going to see you voicing your concerns as a learning opportunity, and they'll actually grow in their respect for you. The fact that you did say something rather than just getting burnout yourself and quitting, you know? Um, and as much as like us old heads can remind each other of, of how we might be coming across, we really need young voices to stand up, to speak out, put us in our place a little bit, remind us that we are in a leadership position, and that means we need to be guiding you and not discouraging you. Um, so some of these people that you're working with might not even realize that's how they're coming across. So you just have to let them know.
Any other thoughts on that from the panel?
Just one thing that I'll add, I just want to echo what John said. I too have dealt with some older folks who have made me feel naive and just a little silly, I think, for my personal thoughts or just my imagination of what the world can be. But they hired you for a reason, and they need us too. And I will say, I have definitely had to exercise my voice because I think for me, I didn't want to come across as disrespectful to an elder. However, again, you're there for a reason, and it does provide them just a different perspective. Um, so yeah, I would just try and have open dialogue if that's something that's possible for you. Obviously, protect your peace. If it's not a safe space, then uh, hopefully there will be a better time where you could do that. But I will just say, I think it's very important just to exercise your thoughts and opinions on that, just so that way you guys as an organization and as a collective are moving in a flow instead of kind of like in combat with each other.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in there's always room to change your mind. And I think this is an area where we can be, we should embrace it, like innovation around these things. Well, thank you everyone so much for this discussion. I want to thank the panelists for giving their time and their thoughts and contributions to this. And I'm going to hand it back to Kashana to take us out.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And thanks to all of our panelists for joining us today. Courtney, Benjamin, John, Clarice, and our moderator, Kevin. We appreciate you and the perspective that you shared today. Thanks to all of you who decided to spend time with us on this Tuesday afternoon. We very much appreciate it. We hope this was a helpful and inspiring conversation. We appreciate the work that you do in your communities. We ask that you stay in touch. We will be circulating a recording of today's conversation via email. And so you will already be signed up to receive that because you RSVP'd for today's event. If you're not already signed up for our email list, please do visit redressmovement.org and sign up. Please stay in touch with us. And we are excited to continue these conversations and continue the work together with all of you. Thank you again for your time. Please be on the lookout for that email with the recording, as well as future invites to the Lessons from the Field webinar series. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thank you.